I want to show you a bunch of decent tips that I've learned after playing over 100 hours of Bellwright. Some simple, some a bit more complicated, but these include things like using companions to harvest wheat. So if you see this large wheat field, you can actually use your companions to harvest this more effectively, thereby grabbing a lot of stuff, and I'll show you how you can use this really well later on to harvest more difficult resources as well. Now, it's also worth knowing simple little things, like for example, if you want to cut down trees, the long sharp bearded axe, which requires level 3 strength, works not only as a decent weapon but also for cutting down trees and getting logs, which means that you don't need both a standard axe and a battle axe, for example, so you can optimize your weapon and tool loadout. Another thing is that stag trophies can be really easily crafted for renown gain, especially if you've already got a hunter's lodge set up to hunt for stags. You can craft these and then you can destroy them afterwards, and you won't get the parts back, but you also won't lose the renown, so you can repeat that process pretty easily. If you're struggling with dealing with bandits and brigands, I'd recommend leading them into a woods that's full of wolves. For some reason, the wolves tend to prefer fighting the brigands because they're a bit higher level than you and more of a threat, so they go for the brigands first. Now, you won't get the resources necessarily out of the kills that way, but it will help soften the herd and make it easier to fight the brigands in general, because they'll have to deal with wolves as well as you, which can really make life a little bit easier, especially in those tougher battles. I'll show you some more tips for dealing with brigands in a little minute. I'm going to show you how to increase your strength in Bellwright in a couple of easy ways that will help boost your strength up so that you can use better weapons and do more damage in fights, so you could hopefully win against bandits and brigands more easily. I'm at level 5 strength at the moment, which as you can see does 25% extra damage as part of the attributes, so it's well worth boosting it up. This also opens up extra weapons that I'll show you in a second and gives you the ability to do more when in fights. Now, it's worth noting as well that one-handed and two-handed attacks can also increase your damage bonus. So you can see I'm at level 5 for one-handed attacks, which gives you an extra 10%, whereas I'm only at level 2, which is just 4% extra. Reading books can obviously help with strength and with those two sorts of attacks, but sadly, archery doesn't help at all. I would recommend getting good at archery though, because it does help to thin the herd and make enemies easier to kill. Now, improved strength also opens up access to other weapons, better weapons, like this fine longsword, which requires level 5 strength, as you can see. This then does a lot more damage in both cutting and piercing attacks, and will hopefully slay enemies more easily, as I'll show you later on. So strength is not only a damage bonus, but also opens up more options for attacks as well. Although archery doesn't help with strength, it can help, because what you can do is kill the enemies and then use their corpse. So you can see I'm at 3,458 strength at the moment. If I then go about bashing this fallen brigand and keep on bashing his corpse with my weapon, making sure that you're making contact so there's a blood splatter, this is actually increasing strength as we do this with every hit. It's a little bit cheesy and might be cheating a little bit, but as you can see, what it does is it actually has boosted me up to 3,493. So there's been a little bit of an increase there. You can use this logic to attack archers as well. I would recommend going to town just meleeing archers until they're dead, because they're easier to kill than your average bandit or brigand. And as you can see, we're at 3,591 now. And if I just keep bashing that corpse until it disappears, which I'm going to speed up because it does take quite some time, then you're building your strength with every hit. Keep repeating this process over and over and over again. Now, it does seem like a chore, but believe me, it's a lot easier than getting into fights and losing them constantly because your strength isn't high enough. So it is worth doing. And you'll find that your strength then gets a nice boost. So now we're up to 3,825, which is quite a significant increase. So it was worth doing that. Now, if you're playing co-op, you can do it with your friends as well. So just get a nice pile of brigands and keep bashing them. You can see I'm now up to level 4 strength. The one thing to bear in mind, though, is the wear and tear on your weapon. So, yes, it's a corpse, but it is still doing damage to your weapon. You can see my friend's weapon breaks here while he's doing it. So you actually want to take a secondary weapon that's not as good as your main one, that you don't really care about whether it's breaking or not, and then just keep bashing those corpses. And now I'm up to level 5 strength. It takes a little bit of time, but it is easier. Now, another tip that I've got for you is to try and make the bandits that you're attacking easier in the first place, so that you can then just get into the fight with them and then use your better weapon. So I've now got the fine long sword out. You can see these are pretty low level bandits. One swing kills them in quite nicely, so the increased strength has made a significant difference there. The one way to do this is to go into your settings. So if you go into the options and then into the game settings, what you'll find is that with raids enabled, so you can turn these off if you really don't want them, but with them turned on and set to high, you can choose maybe easy, for example, to have regular amounts of pretty easy bandits to deal with coming into your camp that you can then just melee without having to melee their corpses. Obviously, the corpse trick might be patched out in future, so you could use this instead, where you're basically actually attacking bandits and killing them. You can do the same with brigands. You can increase the raid frequency for those, but they obviously go to different villages. They're a bit more difficult to deal with. Even on the easy settings, they can be pretty tricky, whereas bandits just attacking your camp can be fairly easy to do. Also, if you get companions and villagers involved in the melee, you can get stuck in and attack the bandits or brigands while they're attacking your friends, and you can get strength that way. So all these things combined can really help to boost that strength up and improve your battle stats. If you've been struggling with dealing with brigand reclamation parties in Bellwright because they're just really punishing and hard to deal with, and maybe your villagers keep getting killed or you do, then I'll show you a quick trick on how to make life a little bit easier, reduce the number of brigand parties, but also just to optimize it so that when you do have to deal with them, it's not as much of a hassle. I found this out by accident, but one of the things that's interesting is you'll see the brigand reclamation party warning about where they're coming and how many there are. So you can see they're going to Farnworth at the moment, for example, with this warning that I've got. Now, Farnworth's down on the bottom right-hand area of the map, which is quite away from my village, which means taking the villagers out to defend it is difficult and takes a lot of time. If you load the game from your previous save, hopefully you've saved recently, but you will find autosave is also usually pretty often, and you can quick save with F5, so I'd recommend doing that regularly. What you might find is you have a save that's near to where you were, and when you load it again, the reclamation party is now going to a completely different place. So you can see they're going to Padstow now, which is conveniently much closer to my village and will make defending it a lot easier. The other thing you can do is you can go into the game settings, and under the game here, you'll see under the difficulty, you can turn raids off, which is related to bandit raids, but you can also reduce the brigand reclamation party strength, setting it to easy, and setting the frequency to low. Now, it is still difficult to fight them on your own, so I would recommend using villagers, but that does reduce the number of them and makes it a little bit easier than it is as default, so it's worth trying both these tricks and hopefully they'll help. Let's talk about crafting for a second, because there's something you might not have realised. So in this example, I'm using the pit saw to turn logs into planks. You might have done similar for wooden planks or for hardwood planks. You take your logs over to the pit saw and then you craft them. What you might not realise, though, is that the planks that are being made right now are not using the log that's in your inventory, as in the one that you can see in my inventory right now. It's one I've already put in there, and that's now crafting up. You can use this to your advantage by going to grab another log from nearby in your storage and then going back to the pit saw. Now, the way that you can use this is essentially I've now deposited that log into there, and then I can go and get another one and put that back into my inventory. And then when you go back to the pit saw, the crafting that's happening is actually from the log you put in a second ago, not the one that's in your inventory currently. What this means is you're then optimizing the way you're doing it so that it's basically allowing you to have more space in your inventory for planks and having to take up less space with logs, and you can just go back and forth a lot more quickly. Sadly, you can't just leave the pit saw alone and it'll automatically craft unless a villager does it, but this is one way to optimize your crafting if you're trying to do it faster. You can also use this to your advantage if you're playing co-op with friends, or at least to their advantage. So my buddy here, for example, hasn't got the ability to craft hardwood planks just yet because his crafting level's too low. But I do, so I've just deposited a hardwood log into the pit saw and set it to do the hardwood planks. And now he's standing there watching it happen, like he's doing the crafting, even though technically he can't because his level isn't high enough. What we discovered during testing is this actually boosts up his crafting level, giving him a little bit of crafting advantage, and you can just repeat this process where I keep dropping logs off and starting the process, and then he finishes it off to boost his level up to be closer to mine, which is pretty neat. If you're trying to build a bunch of buildings in your village, you might well have discovered that you haven't got enough resources for crafting purposes, and it takes ages to build particular buildings because of specific requirements. I'm going to show you a trick to gather those resources more effectively. Now, you know that you can recruit an army from your villagers, turn them into companions, and then take them to war with you, fighting off bandits and brigands and making the world a bit more peaceful, dealing with all these enemies in a much more effective way than on your own, increasing your renown and recruiting more villagers and then expanding your village. But then you obviously have to build more buildings to progress in the game. But the good news is you can use the villagers in other ways as well. So if you set an army of companions, you can actually tell them to do various different things. So press E to give them an order and then click on a specific thing. You can see that you can get them to harvest mushrooms. This is really useful along with harvesting berries to keep them fed. But if you go to somewhere like this, where you've got a location where there's loads of wheat growing, you can actually set the companions to harvest that wheat for you, collect a load of it, and then obviously it can be taken back to your village, turned into straw, and then crafted into thatch. And this is much easier than collecting it on your own, and it seems to be more effective than setting some villagers to go and collect it themselves, because obviously what you're doing is you're collecting with a large group. You can see I've got 16 companions with me here, potentially. There's a few of them missing at the moment, but you can see just how fast they smash through collecting this wheat, going through the process of gathering it. Now, I would recommend that you make sure they've got a large bag when doing so, so equip them with the biggest bag you can. You can start off with a small bag and then expand a bit later on with larger ones. But what you'll find is they'll soon stop working if their bag fills up. So you can see this person doesn't have a bag, their inventory's full. However, if you empty their inventory into your own, you can then give them an order and they'll carry on harvesting. So this is one way to deal with that. You can keep them working like this. Now, obviously, you can gather these resources on your own as well, but it's much more effective to do it with a whole group of companions because you can gather all these resources and then take them back to your village. The other thing that you can do once you get back to the village is you can actually get them to deposit those resources away as well. So if you've got a barn or a storage area, so you can get barns, warehouses, and storage boxes in the game, you can set your companions to go and deposit the things by just aiming at the barn, and then it says interact with warehouse or item, and then what they'll do is they'll go through and they'll automatically deposit what they've collected. So in this case, you can see them putting the wheat away into the barn, and then obviously it can be picked up by the delivery people and used for crafting. Now, you can use this same logic to also harvest wood. So I need a lot of hardwood logs for my village construction. If you take the villagers out as companions with you, you can find some hardwood logs in an area. Farmworth has a lot of it around there, for example. You can then get them to harvest that. Now, one downside to this is that you do need the more advanced axes. So the simple axe won't work with this. So you'll see some of these villagers just aren't working because they don't have the right equipment for doing this. So you need the bigger and better axes and the more advanced rugged one and the fine axe. And the villagers need to also be able to use those. Some of the villagers just can't use those tools unless they're at a certain level. But if they are, you can then order them to collect the hardwood logs from there. They'll chop down the trees for you. You can see a lot of them going to work here collecting those logs. You can apply the same logic I showed you before as well. You can go into their inventory and you can remove the logs from their inventory, put it in your own if you've got bigger bags than they have, and then they'll carry on collecting, and you can gather a lot of hardwood logs, go back to your base and deposit it. This logic can be used for a lot of different things in the game. It makes it easy to collect loads of things really quickly, so hopefully this helps. When you've gained a decent level of trust with a local village, you can obviously recruit people from it. You might have seen that beggars are generally more affordable and can easily be recruited to your village. The downside is their attributes are pretty terrible. Now, at first, it doesn't really matter, but it can be a problem if you're trying to get them to do things. So, for example, trying to give them a better level quality axe to help you with hardwood logs, they're not going to be able to use it, and so they're going to be useless in that regard. You can train them up with books and things to improve their attributes and skills over time. And obviously you can get more of them for the renown cost, but it might be worth spending a little bit more or saving for longer. One of the things you will notice is that you can expel them. So after you've hired them, you can expel them. And one of the things I found is if you've had a beggar in your village for a while and they've improved their attributes, if you do go to expel them from this screen, you'll actually see the renown is higher than what you paid for it for. So you can expel them and then you can go and recruit someone else like an apprentice or someone with higher level stats from a local village that you've worked on. So that can be a pretty handy way to get better villagers. Whoever you've recruited, I'd recommend setting a job priority. I tend to actually limit the jobs that they're doing, turning off everything apart from a couple of jobs, and then setting those in priority order. Obviously, it makes sense to set these in priority against their attributes. So look and see what they're good at, if they do have any decent attributes, and this will be the case for the other villagers, especially the apprentices, and then you can set them to do that specific task. If they're good at farming, set them to do farming, for example. Don't set them to do hunting. Just make some logic to how you're recruiting villagers and using them. There are various different ways to gain trust with a village and boost your trust. I recommend building shrines, and I talked about that in a previous video because that can really make a easy boost to your trust level. But another thing to do is to make sure you grab the wolf fangs and the coins that you find and collect up a good store amount of them. You can then take those to the village elder of the village you're trying to improve your trust with and sell them to him. You'll see there's an option, I have something special for you, then sell your old coins and your wolf fangs. If you've got lots of these, this can tip you over the edge in terms of trust, improve your standing with that village, allow you to recruit more villagers from it that are a higher level, or get closer to the Bellwright status, which will allow you to then recruit apprentices, which can be really handy for your village and for progressing in the game. If you've got absolutely loads of resources in Bellwright and you want to know how to move them to another location, whether it's another base or another outpost, I'm going to show you how to do that. If you've stored loads of things in your warehouse or barn and you want to move them, but you don't want to do it manually because it would take forever, I'm going to show you how to do it. And as you can see, there's an automatic delivery happening right now where things have been delivered from one base to this one. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And I did this to move from one base to a new location, but you can use this logic for outposts too. This is my original village, which is located on the map near Herndine and Padstow. It has since been destroyed. I've actually destroyed a lot of it, but there are multiple barns with multiple things in them. You can see you've got 760 feathers there, for example, and a whole load of things in here, including granite. We have a new base, which is further down the map down here. I want to move all the things down to the location. What I've done is set all the barns so nothing will be stored inside them. So you can go into the storage. You can turn everything off. So what you can do is you go to your settlement section, and then you can see there's a delivery section here at the end. So you go deliveries. And then you can select an item. Select an item and add an origin settlement to add orders for your workers. So what we're actually going to do is go to Middle Diddle on the Wibble, because this is the new place. And then we're going to take feathers as an example. And the origin is going to be Firkham Hall, which is where it's coming from. As you can see, it's got 939 in there. And I want to deliver as many as possible. So I'm going to set it to 200 and set that to happen daily. And then they should regularly go through and do that. Then we want the hardwood logs. Again, Firkham Hall. There's 3 currently. So I'll just set it to 3 one time. And then basically go through and get them to move everything over. But each of these, you'll see if we click on it, tells you how many is in there. If you set Firkham Hall, it shows there is 8 at Firkham Hall. So we can move 8. You have to repeat this process for everything you want to move, searching individually for each and everything that you want to move out. So if you're trying to move bases, it takes absolutely ages, but it is worth doing, and it does speed up the process rather than trying to use your villagers or yourself to move them. What you do have, though, is a maximum delivery capacity that can be delivered each day. So these automatic transfers actually happen at midnight. So what you want to do is to aim to get it to 440 as the maximum amount. Otherwise, it won't be as optimized. But you can still go over that capacity, it just won't deliver everything. Now, you can either set them to daily, or you can set them to one time, depending on how many you've got there. If you go back into that tab, you'll see little notifications alongside them on how it's gone. Whether it's not been delivered because they've run out of capacity, or whether they've all been delivered and you can ignore it. Obviously, you can repeat this process on a regular basis to move everything across. Now, this is obviously useful for an outpost. So if you've got an outpost where you want to have somebody collecting, let's say from a mining hut or a foraging lodge or something, you can create a storage container for them there, and then you can set your food container to automatically ship food from the main base to the outpost so that your villagers are fed in that location and they stay happy. Or you can use it as I am to shift everything from one base to another. And it's much, much easier because you don't have to rely on your villagers when you're manually telling them to be on that delivery schedule, to be delivering things. You can actually set specific things to be delivered to specific locations, and it just happens automatically, and you can move them pretty quickly, unless you've got absolutely loads of things like I have with an excess of feathers, for example. But it does all move across, and this wasn't immediately obvious when I was playing. I only actually discovered this when I was 100 hours in, so hopefully this will help you out in delivering things to your bases. If you've built yourself a nice village in Bellwright, but then later on you discovered it wasn't in a great location because it's really hilly, like this place I've chosen, and the tier 3 buildings just can't be built around there because of all the restrictions on them, you then might want to move your base. If you're doing that, you might wonder whether you can move the town hall or the village hall or both. And you've looked at the build menu and you've realised that they aren't available anymore. So you can't build more than one town or village hall. So you can't set up multiple towns on the map and have multiple town halls, for example. So you can see that neither the town hall or the village hall is listed here under tier 2 or tier 3. The research table is in tier 1. But those two buildings aren't. Well, the good news is if you open up the build menu and click to disassemble, you can disassemble the town hall. And then if you go back into the build menu, you will see that under tier 3, the town hall is listed at the bottom. You can disassemble any building like this and get some of the bits back and then rebuild it elsewhere. But the town hall is the one that might have been a bit scary because it wasn't initially on the list, whereas most other buildings will be. You will, however, not get everything back. If you look at your inventory, you'll see that automatically the things from the town hall have gone into your inventory and into your storage, and there's quite a few of them there. But what you'll see is there isn't everything you need. You'll also find a drop bag on the floor with a bunch of other things in there, including thatch and cob, for example. But again, it's not everything. If you've got a fully constructed building and you disassemble it, you won't get all the parts back. If the building hasn't been fully constructed and you disassemble it, you will get the parts back. So that's worth bearing in mind. Obviously, you then need to go off and go through the build process to rebuild the town hall elsewhere. And the building in this game is awful. It takes forever bashing those little white dots. And obviously, you've got to recollect the extra parts that you've lost when disassembling the town hall. So it is really important to choose a good location for your village and make sure you pick a nice flat area. I'd recommend arming your villagers with hammers and then setting their main tasks to construction, because then they'll help you and they're much faster at doing it than you are. Indeed, you might be better off just leaving them to it because they can bosh up multiple parts in quick succession, whereas you can only do one thing at a time. So without macros, building is absolutely painful. But hopefully this will help you move your town hall, your village hall, and just generally your base. I hope you found these tips and tricks for Bellwright useful. I'm going to be coming back with more in future. Check out the link in the description to a playlist with a bunch of other tips that I've done. Also another long in-depth video like this. I realise this has been a long one, so hopefully you found it useful. If you did, give it a like, drop me a comment down below, share any tips that you've learned that you might think other people would find handy, and thanks very much for watching.